Before we get to the story, I'd like to say thanks so much for visiting my new channel. I'm going to be uploading cosmic horror related stories every single day. So if that sounds good, please drop a like and don't forget to subscribe. It means a lot, especially when just getting started. I hope you enjoy the story. I've worked the night shift at the Ketchikan Maritime Rescue Coordination Center for 12 years now, and in all that time, I thought I understood what I was listening to. Midnight to 8 in the morning, 5 nights a week, monitoring distress frequencies for vessels traveling through the Gulf of Alaska and the frigid waters that stretch north toward the Arctic. It's quiet work most nights, the kind of job that lets your mind wander while your hands and ears stay busy with familiar tasks. Position reports from cargo ships making their way along the coast, weather updates from fishing boats heading out to the grounds before dawn, the occasional minor emergency that gets resolved with a few radio calls and some coordinated assistance from nearby vessels or Coast Guard assets. I've always found a certain peace in the solitude of the night shift, a comfort that most people wouldn't understand. The world outside the windows disappears into complete darkness while I sit surrounded by the soft glow of instrument panels and the constant hum of equipment doing its job. The static that fills the silence between transmissions has become a kind of companion over the years, white noise that keeps me company through the long hours when the rest of the world is asleep and I'm the only one listening to the voices that travel across the black water. I thought I knew what kinds of voices came through those speakers. I thought I understood what kinds of help they needed, what kinds of emergencies waited out there in the dark. I thought the static was just static, empty noise between meaningful signals. 3 weeks ago, I learned how terribly wrong I was about all of it. My name is Marshall Briggs. I'm 44 years old, and I'm writing this because someone needs to know what's been transmitting from the Bering Sea. Someone needs to understand that not every voice on the emergency frequencies belongs to someone who can be saved. Someone needs to be warned about what happens when you answer a call that was never meant for human ears in the first place. The Ketchikan Maritime Rescue Coordination Center sits on the outskirts of town, a small concrete building perched on a hill overlooking the harbor. Nothing fancy about it, just functional government architecture designed for reliability rather than aesthetics. The kind of building that could weather any storm and keep operating when everything else failed. The main operations room holds banks of radio equipment arranged in long consoles, computer terminals displaying vessel tracking data from satellites and transponders, monitors showing weather patterns and sea conditions across our entire area of responsibility. Maps of the Alaska coastline cover every available wall space, marked with shipping lanes and hazard zones, and the positions of rescue assets we could dispatch in an emergency. During the day shift, the center bustles with activity, multiple operators working the consoles simultaneously, supervisors coordinating responses to incidents, the constant background chatter of communication with vessels and aircraft and partner agencies up and down the coast. But at night, the pace slows to something more contemplative. It's mostly just me alone in the main room, monitoring the frequencies, while a skeleton crew handles administrative work in the back offices. The budget doesn't allow for full staffing around the clock, and the overnight hours are usually quiet enough that one experienced operator can handle whatever comes in. I've grown comfortable with that solitude over my years on the night shift, the darkness pressing against the windows like something alive, the glow of instruments in the dim room creating islands of light in the shadows, the soft murmur of frequencies being monitored, voices coming and going like travelers passing through. It feels like standing watch while the rest of the world sleeps, keeping vigil over the black water and the people who make their living on it. The night everything changed started out completely unremarkable, identical to hundreds of other shifts I'd worked over my career. I settled into my station around midnight, ran through the standard equipment checks that I could do in my sleep by now, logged the routine traffic from vessels operating in our area. A cargo ship heading south towards Seattle reported its position and estimated time of arrival at its next port. A fishing boat out of Juneau called in with observations about ice conditions in the northern waters. A tugboat running behind schedule on a transit requested an updated weather forecast. Normal communications, routine business, the background noise that fills the quiet hours without requiring much attention or concern. I had a cup of coffee going cold beside my console, the way I always did, and a paperback novel I'd been slowly working through during the stretches between calls. The night was calm, the frequencies quiet, nothing in the weather forecasts or vessel positions to suggest anything unusual was coming. I remember thinking it would be another peaceful shift, the kind where you could actually make progress on your book and go home feeling rested despite the strange hours. Around 2:30 in the morning, I picked up something strange on one of the emergency frequencies. Static at first, heavy and distorted. The kind of interference you sometimes get when atmospheric conditions are particularly bad or when someone's trying to transmit with damaged equipment from a marginal location. Solar activity could cause it, or unusual temperature inversions in the atmosphere, or a dozen other meteorological factors we'd been trained to recognize. But beneath the static, buried in the noise, like something struggling to reach the surface, I could hear what sounded like a voice, words that I couldn't quite make out, patterns that almost resolved into recognizable language before dissolving back into the hiss and crackle of interference. I adjusted the equipment with practiced hands, fine-tuning the frequency with small, precise movements, running the signal through the filters designed to clean up distorted transmissions and pull voices out of noise. Slowly, gradually, the voice became clearer, emerging from the static, like something rising from deep dark water toward the light above. It was a distress call. Standard maritime format, proper protocol, exactly the kind of emergency transmission I'd heard hundreds of times over my years at the center. A vessel in trouble, requesting immediate assistance, providing identification and coordinates, everything in the right order, all the required elements present, following the established format that every mariner learns. But something about it was wrong, something that made me uneasy before I could even articulate why. The words were correct, arranged in the proper sequence, using the right terminology. But the cadence was off. The rhythm of the speech didn't match how humans actually talk. It sounded like someone reading from a script without understanding what the words meant, pronouncing every syllable correctly, but missing the natural flow that makes speech sound alive. I keyed my microphone and responded according to protocol. Requested identification. asked for the vessel's name and current position, asked them to confirm the nature of their emergency and the number of souls aboard. The response came through the static, and I felt the blood drain from my face so fast it made me dizzy. The voice identified itself with a call sign I knew all too well, a call sign that had haunted the coordination center for years, that every operator in Alaska Maritime Rescue had studied and discussed and wondered about. The Arctic Pioneer. Everyone who worked this job knew that name. The Arctic Pioneer was a research vessel that had disappeared 3 years ago in the remote northern reaches of the Bering Sea. The ship had been conducting deep-water geological surveys for a private company called Meridian Deep Sea Studies when it sent a final garbled transmission and vanished without a trace. One day, it was there, reporting its position and progress, and the next day, it was simply gone, as if the ocean had swallowed it whole. The search operation lasted 2 weeks and covered thousands of square miles of empty grey water. Coast Guard cutters and helicopters deployed from every available base. Aircraft flew grid patterns over the search area until their fuel ran low. Every protocol was followed, every possibility explored, every resource committed to finding some trace of what had happened. They found nothing. No wreckage floating on the surface. No debris field marking where the ship had gone down. No life rafts or emergency beacons or oil slicks or anything else that would have indicated what happened. Just empty ocean stretching to the horizon in every direction, keeping its secrets. The Arctic Pioneer was declared lost with all hands. 12 crew members, presumed dead. Their bodies never recovered from whatever grave the sea had made for them. The case was officially closed. The investigation filed away. The families given what closure could be offered when there's nothing to bury and no answers to give. And now, 3 years later, someone was using that ship's call sign to send a distress call from coordinates far to the north, in waters that should be frozen solid this time of year. I checked the records in our database with trembling fingers, verified the call sign against the historical files, confirmed what I already knew with complete certainty. The Arctic Pioneer was listed as sunk and presumed destroyed, its crew presumed dead, the investigation long since completed. Whatever was transmitting on that frequency, it couldn't possibly be the ship whose identity it claimed. I tried to raise the vessel again, following protocol, even as every instinct screamed that something was deeply wrong. I asked for confirmation of their identity, asked them to verify their situation, asked for any additional information that could help me understand what I was dealing with. The response that came back made the hair on my arm stand straight up and sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature in the room. Multiple voices this time, overlapping each other, speaking the same words but slightly out of sync, like a recording being played back on multiple devices with a slight delay between them. The cadence was still wrong, the rhythm still inhuman, like something playing back recorded speech without understanding how language actually works. The voices rose and fell in patterns that didn't match natural conversation, emphasizing wrong syllables, pausing in wrong places, stringing words together in ways that were technically grammatically correct, but felt fundamentally alien. And beneath the voices, I heard something else, a low, pulsing tone that seemed to bypass my ears entirely and resonate somewhere deep in my chest, a vibration that didn't belong on any radio frequency, couldn't have been produced by any transmitting equipment I knew of. It felt less like a sound and more like a pressure, like something vast and distant pushing against my awareness from somewhere very far away. I terminated the transmission and sat frozen at my console, hands shaking against the controls. The static continued hissing softly from the speakers, but the voices had stopped. I was alone again in the dark room, surrounded by the familiar glow of instruments, trying to convince myself that I'd imagined what I'd just heard. But I knew I hadn't imagined it, and I knew I couldn't rest until I understood what it really was. I accessed the archive files on the Arctic Pioneer, pulling up the complete records from its final voyage that had been stored in our system and in the databases of every agency that had participated in the search. The ship had been operated by Meridian Deep Sea Studies, a private research company conducting geological surveys in some of the most remote and inhospitable waters of the Bering Sea. Their stated mission was mapping seafloor formations and identifying potential sites for future resource extraction. Routine work for that industry, nothing that should have attracted any unusual attention. I found the audio recordings from the vessel's transmissions and began playing them from the beginning of its final voyage. The earlier recordings were completely normal, professional voices delivering routine position reports, weather observations noting sea state and ice conditions, casual communication between the ship and its shore-based operations center back in Seattle. The crew sounded relaxed, confident, experienced. They had done this work many times before and knew exactly what they were doing. But as I progressed through the recordings, moving forward through the days and weeks of the voyage, something changed. About 2 weeks into the expedition, the tone of the transmissions shifted noticeably. The crew's voices became strained, their reports increasingly fragmented and confused. They mentioned finding something on the seafloor during a routine sonar sweep, something their instruments couldn't properly image or identify. They described it as a structure, but the dimensions they reported didn't make any logical sense. Too large, too geometrically regular, too precisely shaped to be any natural formation, but far too ancient to be anything humans could have built. Buried under centuries of sediment until recent seismic activity in the region had partially exposed it. The captain's voice in these recordings carried an edge of uncertainty that I recognized immediately, the sound of a professional encountering something that didn't fit any of his training or experience, something that made him question whether he should continue the investigation or turn the ship around and head for safe harbor. They chose to continue. They always do. The transmissions from the final days of the Arctic Pioneer's voyage were difficult to listen to. The crew was frightened now, their fear evident in every word despite their attempts to maintain professional composure. They reported that something was happening at the structure, that their instruments were detecting movement from within it. Something was rising, they said. Something was emerging from the depths of the thing they had found, and none of their equipment could identify what it was. The captain ordered an immediate return to port. The engines wouldn't respond to commands. Navigation systems malfunctioned, displaying impossible readings. The ship was drifting toward the structure instead of away from it, pulled by currents or forces that shouldn't have existed. Then came the static, overwhelming and absolute, drowning out the panicked voices of the crew. And beneath it, that same pulsing tone I had heard in tonight's transmission. The sound that didn't belong on any radio frequency, that seemed to come from somewhere beyond the normal spectrum of human perception. The final transmission from the Arctic Pioneer wasn't a distress call. It was voices, many voices, overlapping and interweaving, speaking words that might have been English, but arranged in patterns that didn't form any coherent meaning. Syllables and phrases pulled from the crew's earlier communications, fragments of their reports and conversations and routine transmissions, reassembled in combinations that almost sounded like language, but weren't. Like something had recorded everything the crew had ever said and was now playing it back in random order, trying to learn the shape of human speech without understanding what any of it was supposed to mean. Then silence. The transmission ended, and the Arctic Pioneer was never heard from again. Until tonight, when it answered my call. I understood now, sitting alone in the coordination center, with the weight of that knowledge settling over me like something cold and heavy. Whatever the Arctic Pioneer had found at the bottom of the Bering Sea, it hadn't simply destroyed the ship. It hadn't killed the crew in any conventional sense. It had taken them, absorbed them, consumed their voices and their words and their patterns of speech. It had learned to use their radio equipment, learned to form their sounds, learned to send signals into the void in patterns that mimicked the distress calls it had heard them make. And it had been transmitting ever since, for 3 years, calling out into the darkness and waiting for someone to answer. When I had responded tonight, I had given it exactly what it wanted, a connection, a confirmation that something was listening, a new voice to study and learn from. Over the following weeks, the transmissions continued every night without fail. The voices grew more sophisticated each time, learning from every interaction, adapting their patterns to sound more human. They used my name, though I'd never given it. They asked me to send ships to their coordinates. They begged for help using the perfect format of maritime distress calls. I never responded again after that first night, but I couldn't stop listening. Other operators along the coast began reporting similar transmissions, distress calls from vessels that had sunk years ago, voices that sounded familiar but somehow wrong. The thing in the Bering Sea was casting a wider net, reaching out to anyone who might answer, and some people were responding, dispatching rescue vessels to coordinates where nothing human waited to be saved. I tried to warn my colleagues. They thought I was having a breakdown. Then 3 weeks after first contact, the transmissions changed one final time. The voices were clear and coherent, no longer asking for rescue. They thanked me for listening. They explained that they had learned enough about us, about our words and our patterns, and our ways of calling out for help. They were going to stop transmitting now. The experiment was complete. The frequency went silent. Truly, completely silent. For the first time in 3 years. I still work the night shift, still monitor the dark waters, still listen to the frequencies. The voices from the Arctic Pioneer haven't returned, but I know they're still out there, beneath the ice, whatever they've become. They learned what they wanted to learn from us. I don't know what they'll do with that knowledge. I'm writing this as a warning. If you work the frequencies, if you monitor distress channels, Pay attention to what you hear. Not every call comes from someone who can be saved. Not every voice is human. If you hear a call sign from a vessel that sank years ago, don't respond. If you hear voices that sound almost right, but not quite, turn off your radio and walk away. And whatever you do, don't give them your name. The last transmission from the Arctic Pioneer wasn't human, and whatever sent it is still listening, still waiting in the deep, dark water for the next voice to add to its collection.